I'm Serena Williams, and I'm healthier on Row. I've lost 34 pounds in a year with GLP-1s, diet, and exercise. On Row, you can access GLP-1 options, including the first FDA-approved GLP-1 pill for weight loss. Go to row.co/journey to see if you qualify. 14 to 20% average weight loss in 1 year in non-diabetics with obesity or overweight with a weight-related medical condition versus 2.2% to 3.1% in placebo arm. RX only. To stay informed about serious side effects, go to row.co/safety.
The road through Callow Hill slips quietly between old hedgerows and fields that have changed little in living memory. Ash and oak lean over the narrow lanes, their branches meeting above the tarmac, before opening again onto scattered farms and rough pasture. It is easy to drive through without giving the place a second thought, yet there are moments, particularly towards evening, when the landscape seems older than it should. The light lingers strangely beneath the trees, familiar landmarks appear further away than expected, and the silence settles over the hill as though it has been waiting there for centuries. Among the stories carried by that silence are two that have become impossible to separate. One belongs to an old farmhouse that still stands. The other belongs to a house that vanished long ago. Between them lies a stretch of hillside where the past is said to have never entirely let go. The farmhouse has already lived a long life before anyone thought to write down its story. Built centuries ago, it stood behind thick hedges and weathered brick, uneven floors and dark beams polished smooth by generations of hands. The great fireplace filled one end of the house, and every room carried the familiar creaks and groans of old timber settling with the passing of the day. Local people quietly repeated that during the years when Catholic priests were hunted across England, the house had offered shelter to those travelling in secret. Like many old Worcestershire homes, its history became tangled with whispers of hidden refuge and dangerous journeys made beneath the cover of darkness. It already felt like a place that remembered more than it revealed. In the early 1970s, a visitor spent the night there with a friend who owned the farm. Nothing unusual was expected. It was simply somewhere to stay before another ordinary day. The owner left early the following morning for work, careful not to disturb the guest. The old house settled back into silence. Some time later, the visitor woke. At first, they heard only the familiar sounds of an ancient building. A floorboard creaked somewhere beyond the bedroom. A beam gave its slow complaint. The noises were so ordinary that they barely seemed worth noticing. Then someone crossed the room. A dark figure moved calmly past the foot of the bed. Still heavy with sleep, the visitor assumed their friend had forgotten something and returned upstairs. They called out a greeting. There was no reply. The figure continued across the room without haste, passed beyond the doorway, and was gone. The visitor climbed from the bed, expecting to find someone moving about the house. Instead, every room was empty. Their friend had left well over an hour before. The front door was still locked. Outside, the farmyard lay quiet beneath the morning sky. The memory stayed with the witness long afterwards, not because anything terrifying had happened, it was because it felt so ordinary. There had been no crashing doors, no icy breath, no ghostly cry, just the unmistakable certainty that someone had walked across the room when no one else could possibly have been there. Older people around Callow Hill simply nodded when they heard the story. They knew another tale tied to the same hillside, one stranger still. Not far away once stood another house. It disappeared many years ago. Time, weather, and changing fortunes eventually brought it down until almost nothing remained. Grass covered the ground, where its walls had stood, and the fields slowly reclaimed the place. Before long, only those who had grown up nearby remembered that a building had ever occupied the site. The stories remained. The house had earned a dark reputation long before it disappeared. Quiet conversations spoke of violent deaths within its walls. One family recalled murder, another remembered bloodshed. Others refused to say exactly what had happened, only that the place had long been avoided after nightfall. Years after the house had vanished, people began seeing it again. Towards dusk, when the last light rested across the hillside, a farmhouse would sometimes appear where none should have stood. Not a ruin, not broken walls, a complete house. It looked so ordinary that there seemed no reason to question it. A farmhouse standing peacefully among the fields, exactly where a farmhouse ought to be. Then the road would bend. A passing tree would hide it for a heartbeat. Someone would glance away. When they looked back, it had gone. Only the empty hillside remained. At first, people assumed they had mistaken the shape of distant trees in the failing light. Yet the story refused to disappear. Drivers, walkers, and local people, years apart and unknown to one another, all described the same impossible sight. A farmhouse standing quietly on the hillside, before vanishing as though it had never been there at all. No lights ever shone from its windows, no smoke drifted from its chimney, no figure stood in its doorway. The house itself was the ghost. The feeling attached to that patch of ground never seemed to fade. Whatever had happened there had become part of the landscape itself, clinging to the hill long after the walls had fallen. For years this story has been told, though it belonged entirely to Callow Hill in Worcestershire. While researching this episode, however, I discovered something unexpected. A remarkably similar tale of a phantom house appears in older folklore from another Callow Hill across the county boundary in Herefordshire. Whether one story travelled to the other, or whether two places with the same name gave rise to the same tradition, no one can now say. Like so much folklore, it seems to have wandered from one fireside to the next, changing early enough to belong wherever it was told. As evening settles over Callow Hill, the fields lose their colour, and the hedgerows become dark lines against the fading sky. The old farmhouse stands where it always has, its windows catching the last light before darkness reaches the hill. Beyond it lies an empty stretch of ground where nothing stands anymore, until, every now and then, for the briefest of moments, it does. Before I finish, I'd like to mention Worcestershire author Hugh Williams, whose books on the ancient landscape of Mercia first introduced me to another way of looking at places like Callow Hill. Most place name specialists agree that Callow simply means a bare or treeless hill, derived from the Old English callow. Hugh has explored another possibility, that some places bearing the name may preserve the memory of something far older, perhaps even a forgotten local deity, or a landscape once regarded as sacred. It's an intriguing hypothesis, rather than accepted conclusion, but it's the sort of idea that encourages you to look at an otherwise ordinary hillside with fresh eyes. If ancient folklore, hidden landscapes, and the forgotten history of Mercia interest you, I'd recommend Hugh's books. There'll be a link in the description. Whether you agree with every conclusion or not, they're thoughtful, engaging, and full of fascinating ideas that remind us just how much our landscape still has stories waiting to be uncovered. Thank you for listening to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. If you enjoy these stories, you can support the podcast and get access to MP3s over on buymeacoffee.com/Ghost Tales. They're £1.50 each, or free if you're a subscriber. You can find everything at ghosttales.co.uk and follow on Facebook and Instagram at Ghost House Podcast.
Suffering from dry, tired, irritated eyes? Don't let dry eyes win. Use Systane Pro. It hydrates, restores, and protects dry eyes for up to 12 hours. Systane Pro. Triple action dry eye relief.